it's time to ask an uncomfortable question. Could William Saliba leave Arsenal Football Club? We're going to answer that question today and more in the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me. Really appreciate you all, of course, being here. If you are new to the channel, we do these shows every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Please do subscribe to the channel if you are new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Thank you as always for joining us on the weekend. The weekend is always our toughest period. And you being here does certainly help with that. So thank you to everybody that has decided to tune in and that is with us today. It is insanely appreciated, as you can imagine. So thank you for that. Good morning to those joining us, though, live in the chat. Black Shine, Peter, Arasilki, Paul, Knowledge, John, Jitty, Stevie, Amira, Zoom, Mark, Stephen, Wendy, Matt G, Shari, Rowan. We've got Paul and Rich and Louis. Thank you to you all for tuning in as always, and I hope your week's been good. I hope the weekend treats you even better. But let's not waste any time and get into today's stories, shall we? We begin with Roberto Olabe, whose name has, of course, been pretty much peppering your timelines over the last 48 hours. Suggestions from Spain that Arsenal had made an offer for Roberto Olabe and it's considered to be something that he is interested in. Olabe, of course, the director of football at Real Sociedad. He is leaving at the end of this season after announcing to the club his intentions to move on. And his work with La Real has been incredibly appreciated by clubs in Europe, including, as we've mentioned, Arsenal. Now, there's a link in the description for an article that I wrote yesterday. I went into a lot of detail about why Arsenal are considering Olabe, the work that he's done in San Sebastian, and looking into kind of why he would be and why he is being considered as a good candidate for the club in terms of the signings he made, in terms of the sales he's also managed to bring in for Real Sociedad, also talking about his negotiation skills in convincing players to sign for Real Sociedad instead of other teams, some big players, including the likes of David Silva in that as well. And of course, his continuation to keep key players at the club like Mikel Oyarzabal as well. And of course, he would be needing to work on some Arsenal players and their contracts as they look to try and stay at the club for the long term. We'll come on to one of those shortly. But it is North London Derby Day in the WSL. If you're able at all to go and support the girls, Arsenal are playing at Tottenham in today's WSL match. It's a big game. It could see Arsenal rise to 15 points in the table, taking them within 4 of Manchester City before they play their game. They are currently 4th in the table. Manchester United are joint on points on 12, but have played a game less after that slow start to the season. Arsenal have picked up. Big win against Juventus in midweek, and Rene Sluga has done a brilliant job in getting a response from this side after the decision for the resignation of Jonas Eiderval. So really does it's a really important game, and for any Arsenal fan, a North London derby means that you stand up and take attention. So let's hope that we can get the job done later on this afternoon. Last couple of stories. It's not, as it is international break, we are unsurprisingly not exactly inundated with lots of news, but just to give you a little bit of a roundup of some of the international action. Leandro Trossard played the full 90 minutes for Belgium in their 1-0 defeat to Italy. Gabriel started for Brazil in their 1-1 draw with Venezuela. Gabriel Martinelli actually came off the bench. I think there must have been a late call-up because I was under the impression before, like a few days ago, that he hadn't gone. But clearly he has, and there must have been a late call-up. He wasn't included in the initial list of players, but clearly has gone out there and joined up with the squad as a replacement. So Martinelli not in London and with the Brazilian national side and featuring for Brazil. Saliba, however, was completely rested by France. And I think that we can all be very appreciative to Didier Deschamps for not using Saliba and giving him a week's rest, which I think will be will be, very much appreciated. I know there'll be some people saying, well, he did make a mistake in France's last game, so he's been dropped, but I don't care. I'm just glad he's not playing, to be honest. I'm just very happy indeed that he is getting the rest that he needs, because he's been playing a lot of football for Arsenal, of course, as well. But it is William Saliba who takes the precedence today, because as you have probably seen, plenty of stories keep circulating that Saliba is being linked with an exit from Arsenal. So I thought what we would do is kind of round up what we know, where the situation is at, what needs to happen in the future from an Arsenal perspective, and what could happen from a not so good Arsenal perspective as well. Saliba's contract is as follows. He has it running until 2027. Arsenal was successful in convincing him to sign a new deal a couple of years ago, but that extension only ran through till 27. There's no option to extend that by a further year. And he's not alone in that 2027 cutoff. Both Gabriel Magalhaes and Bukayo Saka both see their situations also run out in 2027 as well. So big job for whoever's coming into that sporting director role. Big job for Richard Garlick as managing director. Big job for Mikel Arteta in trying to convince the players to stay. Now, reports have emerged from both Spain and France suggesting that Saliba would be open to the idea of joining Real Madrid. Now, I don't think that a player should necessarily be chastised or criticised or scrutinised for saying that they are open to moving to the best club in the world at some point in their career. At some point in their career, the idea of moving to the biggest team to have ever existed, I don't think I'm going to scathe a player for having an openness to that idea. I also think that there's a degree of Arsenal having to accept that they are, when they reach this level where they're competing in the Champions League, they're competing for titles, they've got players that are designed to do that, that they are going to have, with the best players in the world for their positions, they're going to have teams that are coveting those players. You're going to have to deal with that, and you're not going to be able to keep all of them. That is the reality. We hope that they do. We hope that we can keep our best players. We hope that we can convince them to stay. But the reality is, when you're in this position, you lose them. Chelsea losing Eden Hazard. Liverpool might lose Trent Alexander-Arnold, have lost Coutinho, have lost Luis Suarez, of course, as well in the past to Barcelona, both of them. We've seen Manchester City lose this summer Julian Alvarez for different reasons, of course, but still leaving a big club like City to move to Atletico Madrid for a good fee. And it is the good fee side of things that if we are to lose any very key players, Arsenal need to make sure that they absolutely maximise the amount of money that they could get from any potential sale. And Saliba is well and truly a £100 million plus player, without a doubt. Even with 2 years left on his contract, that is the reality of where we stand on a valuation of Saliba. He would be a huge sum of money. Arsenal, of course, are well within their rights also to just simply say no, the player is under contract, he's not for sale, and he might have to push for a move if indeed he wants to get one. There's been no suggestions that that's the case. A player saying, or even just, he's not even said, it's just been reported that he is open to the move is not an indication that he is going to leave. It's purely speculation at this stage. So those of you that are worried about this, you should be, to a degree, concerned, of course. I'm not going to tell you to not be concerned that Arsenal could lose their best players, because we're in a realm of football now where we have the best players in the world in certain positions, and that means that there's going to be other clubs that are looking to chase them. It's also worth pointing out, everyone is replaceable. You are able to bring in players. There are players on the market, especially if you were to get that amount of money, to replace those key figures in the team, and it's not the end of the world. You look at teams like Liverpool who have lost massive players like Suarez, like Coutinho. I mean, Coutinho is a great example. They lose Coutinho and they go on to win leagues and Champions Leagues. Just because you lose your biggest and best players doesn't mean that you aren't able to go and reinvest that money in making your squad better and getting you into those situations whereby you can compete as you were before, maybe even better. You can't be beholden to one player. But I do want to say, there is no indication right now that Saliba is going to go, has made a decision to go, that he's not going to sign a new contract. A lot of the Arsenal contract talks at the moment, I think, are somewhat on hold until we sort out the sporting director situation. And it certainly was an emotional thing when Edu announced his departure. We know from my colleague Kai Karnak's piece in Football London that He spoke to the players. It was quite an emotional thing because he built up a very good relationship with many of them and had signed many of them and convinced players like Saliba to sign a new deal with the club. So, yes, of course, there was an attachment there. But we know that if Arsenal go out and bring in someone like Olabe, who we've talked about already, he's got a really good record of convincing players to stay at the club. We've seen that with Mikael Oyarzabal. You could arguably argue that with Martin Zubimendi as well this summer as well. So we are going to be in a position, I think, with whoever comes in, be that Olabe, be that a Thiago Scuro, be that a Simon Rolfs, be that a Thomas Rosicky, any of these figures are going to be expected to step up and try and convince these people and players to stay at the club. But you can't keep them all. Realistically, it may be that one day we lose Saliba. Maybe one day we lose some other players that we don't want to. It is then going to be on the club to replace them. It's going to be on the club to invest the money that we get for those players correctly, just like other teams have done who have been in a very similar position to us. We'll get your thoughts on the Saliba call and the Saliba situation in part 2. So without further ado, let's run the credits and jump to that stage. So, William Saliba, let's hear your thoughts on this topic, a very international break topic, if you will. We'll go for the next 15, 20 minutes, taking some of your comments and seeing what you think about this. And of course, any other questions we'll also be looking into as well. Don't feel like you need to contain it to this particular topic, but please do leave your thoughts after, of course, what we've seen are numerous reports over the last week or so. Gooner says, everyone can leave. Oh no, the clubs are going to end. RM says, I can't believe Madrid might actually pull off Trent and Alphonso Davies on free transfers right after signing Mbappe. They need to be investigated. I mean, I don't know why they would need to do that. I mean, players, as Arsene Wenger himself said, are in a position where they can run down their contracts now. They're also seeing potential moves to clubs open up that wouldn't be necessarily available to them before because their own team wouldn't want them to sell. So they're signing contracts of a restricted length of time. They're not committing early in those deals to further contracts unless you perhaps play for Chelsea. So I don't really get why they need to be investigated at all, because players have recognised, their intermediaries, their agents have recognised, have advised them, I think, in this sense, that you can earn big moves and get big money by seeing your contract run down. It's been something that's been predicted by Arsene Wenger, as I mentioned in the past as well. So it's not in any way suspicious. Nick says it's like 2000 again with Vieira and Thierry Henry. Exactly. Like when we were at our absolute heyday and performing at the elite level, these players were being linked with exits. They were always being linked with exits. And eventually both of them did leave. And we didn't handle their exits in the best way. Of course, it was combined with, it was combined with the stadium build, and that restricted what we were able to do. But we still didn't handle their exits. We never replaced Vieira up until probably the signing of Thomas Partey. That's how long it really took to bring in a defensive midfielder of the requisite caliber. We never really replaced Thierry Henry until Van Persie kind of stepped into that mold to a degree. But then when Van Persie left, we didn't sign a top striker until Aubameyang. Olivier Giroud, I think, is an underrated figure in the team, but he's not of the level of Van Persie or even to the goal-scoring level of Aubameyang either. We never really were able to do that. So Arsenal, if we are to lose those key players, it's really important that Arsenal replace them correctly. Daniel says Saliba is a Gooner, another 3 years at least. Well, the reality is, of course, that he only has 2 years left on his contract come the end of this season. And that tends to be a very key period for any player, especially at Arsenal. Arsenal have been very outspoken. Edu has been outspoken previously that when players reach 2 years on their contracts, decisions need to being made. Clubs, of course, are going to be on red alert at that period of a player's contract because 2 years is usually where like a big sale can happen. When it gets down to 1 year, it starts getting a little bit dangerous. So clubs need to start maintaining those length of contracts when players reach that threshold in particular. So it seems like it's a longer time than it is. The reality is and can be very different. Gooner says, Tom, Ødegaard, Saka and White, Gabriel could all leave. I'm more worried about that. I mean, White has just signed a brand new contract. Ødegaard has recently just signed a brand new contract. They're running through till 28. I think White maybe even 29. So I don't think you need to worry about those two. Major Lee says, do you think if Saliba leaves, White, Timber will replace him and Arsenal will go and sign a right-sided player or just a straight replacement for anywhere else? Of course, Arsenal have that depth. White and Timber, of course, can occupy those centre-back and right-back positions, which would give Arsenal somewhat depth. But we would need to go into the market still and add a right-sided player to the squad. That would be really, really important. Sam says, do we realise that we need a striker? We need to go for a proper 9 this January. It's not going to happen, Sam, unfortunately. I just don't see it happening. And if it does happen, I worry that it will be for a player that's not good enough. We've talked about this before. There are 2 players that stand out for me as the types that Arsenal need to go for, and that is Gyökeres and Isak. If we aren't able to get either one of those 2, I just don't see Arsenal being able to land a striker of the requisite caliber that we need. Any other forward at the moment out there, I just don't think is going to be of the required standard. There are players that kind of rise and fall. There are players that have big seasons and then kind of dip away. Patrick Schick in the past, or who I was really kind of enamored by at the time. We're seeing Marmoush this season in the Bundesliga have an excellent campaign. Is that just, again, another one-season situation? Think about Serhou Guirassy last season as well. It's very, very difficult. It's very, very, very difficult. Paul says, no player is bigger than the club. If Saliba goes, we have Ben White capable to cover the position, I think, or hope that Saliba signs a new extension, though, with Gab and Saka as well. Paul says, we still haven't won anything, and that will be a factor into Saliba's decision. If we won the league or the Champions League, it would be easier to convince them to sign. And this is a fair point. You know, of course, it's going to be a situation where we need to make sure that we try and showcase our ability to compete. But it's also on those players that are in the team to help us get there. You know, we can't look. I mean, Saliba has obviously had some really big mistakes this season. He's been in a position where he has, to a degree, cost us in certain points. And he's had a little bit of a dip in form. The players also need to look internally as well at their own kind of commitment and kind of their output as well. YouTube user says, how about Osimhen? Not for me. I'm just not convinced. I'm just not convinced that Osimhen is the right player character to be signed by Arsenal to be our centre forward. I just think that Isak or a Gyökeres just offers for me more assurances than I see from Osimhen right now. RM says he'd rather have Isak over Gyökeres because Isak solves our current left-wing dilemma potentially as well. Dan says, I definitely think we need to beat all the other teams to buy Gyökeres still. John says, with Lyon's issues, are there any players that we should raid them for in January? I actually did an article talking about Ryan Cherki as a potential player that Arsenal may want to look at. So yes, maybe Cherki could be a player that Arsenal could look to try and poach in January. And Liverpool have also been linked with him, only 21 years of age, and is currently the second highest shot creator in Europe's top 5 leagues right now. So quite an impressive level of numbers there. Trevor says, I think I've heard that saying that he's going now, where many times it's come back and bitten many others on the backside as well. We hear stories rise and fall. It's the international break. Naturally, that leads to kind of, naturally that leads to us being in a position where we find ourselves looking at stories that haven't come out prior to the international break starting as well. Lloyd says, do you see us spending 100 million in the summer? I would hope that we would spend at least 100 million in the summer, Lloyd. Arsenal have had a net zero summer, and that leads us to have more financial freedom this January, but not loads. But when it gets to 2025, depending on how much Arsenal spend in January, if they spend any at all, Arsenal should have far more freedom to spend and should be looking at 25, as I have said before, as a massive year to set up that next season, to get that marquee striker, to get another defender, to get another midfielder, and also we need to look at a backup goalkeeper as well, because of course we won't have Neto, who'll be leaving at the completion of his loan deal. Let's go to Cesaretti, who says, morning, Tom. What do you think about Arsenal going after Jonathan David in the summer window? Of course, Jonathan David's contract is expiring come the end of this season. Lille yet to convince him to sign a brand new deal with the club. He's had a very strong campaign so far, 13 goals, 2 assists in 19 games across all competitions. He's a player, of course, who's now, 24 years of age. He's had rises and falls. He's had seasons that haven't been as convincing as of last season. He had 26 goals, 9 assists in 47 games, a really good return. So you can't ignore the numbers that this guy is putting up. The season before that was 19 goals in 2021. He managed to end the season on 13 goals. So he's gone up. But there is this rise from Jonathan David. The question mark is he of the level for Arsenal? But as a free transfer in the summer, you could argue that we could sign him and Isak, who was pointed out before, could also be a versatile figure for our front line and could also play in a wide area. So Jonathan David, if you can get him on a free, potentially is a no-brainer and doesn't also stop you from maybe adding a replacement for Gabriel Jesus as more of a marquee signing as well, like a Gyökeres or like an Isak as well. Kian says, Tom, who would be your number one target if William Saliba was to leave the club? It's a really difficult question because the idea of Arsenal being able to replace arguably the Premier League's best centre-half is very, very tough. Are there players out there that are showcasing their strength, their ability? We saw PSG sign Pacho in the summer after he did really well with Frankfurt. We've seen Manchester United, of course, go out and sign another young French in Leroy centre-back as well. Is that where Arsenal are going to look again? Are they going to go into France and have a look at potentially other young centre-halves to try and replace Saliba? Or are they going to go for somebody a little bit more established? Could you go to another Premier League team? And if they have another struggling season, you look at somebody like Aston Villa. If they finish outside of European competition, I know they're 9th right now, but they're only 1 point off 3rd. Could you look at someone like Pau Torres and try and snatch him away from another Premier League team? You need to be ruthless. Arsenal need to go into those markets and try and find the best potential options to replace him. Murillo has had a fantastic campaign and last season at Nottingham Forest as well. Another young player as well. So are there players out there? It's going to be very, very difficult to try and find that. Earl says, morning, Tom. I think we need to get Gyökeres in January to lift us as a fan base and the players and scare opponents. It will send a message to everyone that we are serious. I mean, I agree entirely that I'd love to get him in January and I'd love to see that happen. The reality is that I don't see that being feasible. I could be proven wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong, but it just doesn't seem as though that is going to be a realistic venture for Arsenal to be able to do, because financially a release clause of £83 million that has to be paid up front in January, with Arsenal being in the financial situation that they have been in, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. I doubt it. So in the summer, sure, the new cycle comes around in July, it restarts again, and Arsenal would have had a very clean year prior to that. You'd think they'd have the ability to go and do that. But in January, tough one. Greg says, for me, the biggest risk with Saliba is looking at Real Madrid's recent tactics. They get connected with players and then their entourage and encourage them to run their contracts down. With 1 year to go, they don't then pay big fees because they can. Real Madrid have got the weight, the reputation for players to be willing to run their contracts down and wait for that move. And maybe we're seeing that with Alphonso Davies and Trent Alexander-Arnold. We will have to wait and see. Amaro Gooner says, Tom, whatever happened to the class player Mbappe who joined Real Madrid? It's not been going as smoothly as perhaps he thought it might, it's fair to say, Mbappe. So it's not a guarantee that you have success just by making that switch. Maximia says, why are we fine with letting Saliba leave? We should stop being a feeder club for anyone. We showed that we have left the latter years of Wenger behind. Now it's time to walk that talk. Gutting if he leaves. I mean, it's not a case of letting the guy leave. Arsenal will do everything in their power to keep Saliba at the club, be that with a significant monetary offer, be that, of course, by just simply saying no if an offer comes in for him this summer or the following summer. So it's not a case of Arsenal being fine with it. No one's fine with it. I'm not fine with it. We need to do everything within our power to keep him. Realistically, though, you can't keep every single player. So it's just an expectation. It's just giving a little bit of reality that not everybody is going to stay in the long term, and big clubs still do lose big players, and it has happened. But of course, Arsenal are going to be doing everything they can to keep the player. At no point has it been suggested that Arsenal won't be doing everything in their power to try and keep him at the club. Trotter says, the best never let their best players leave. Liverpool, Suarez, Coutinho. Manchester City let go of Julian Alvarez, of course, in the summer. Chelsea let Eden Hazard go to Real Madrid. Bayern Munich, of course, have let players like Lewandowski leave and end up at Barcelona and have a fantastic period of time. Of course, they brought in Harry Kane to replace him, but Lewandowski's numbers haven't exactly dropped, and they had to spend 100 million odd on Harry Kane as well. Manchester City let Leroy Sané go to Bayern Munich. Best players leave big clubs. It happens. It's not exactly wild. It's not exactly unexpected. It's not exactly a surprise. It does happen. So let's not pretend that it never, ever happens. Man United letting Ronaldo go, says Matt G, being another one. Thierry Henry, Vieira, of course, leaving Arsenal. RM says Kivior, Tierney, and potentially Zinchenko could all leave in the summer. So we're going to need another left-sided player as well, potentially a Yoral Hater. Would love to see that happen. He's a fantastic young player. Matt G says, Tom, please, for the love of everything, lie to us. Tell us that we're signing Gyökeres, Isak, and the Iron Man in January. Morgan says, Tom, just to clarify for me, Saliba is contract until the end of the 26-27 season. So it's the window of July, August 26 that things get serious if he hasn't signed. Yes, Morgan, you're absolutely right. His contract runs through until 27. But Arsenal, of course, do like to have that 2-year threshold kind of protecting them. So 25 is that 2-year threshold. Like, we will hit that point next summer. So Arsenal and Saliba will certainly be engaged in a level of talks that might become uncomfortable. If you remember, both Saka and Saliba did get down to 1 year left on their contract before they then renewed their deals with Arsenal. So let's wait and see and keep those fingers crossed that this turns out to be all right. Also, the amount of money the club makes with the Merchgate receipts, Champions League and player sales, we must have the funds to get Victor Gyökeres. Unfortunately, and I'm saying this with love and respect, you don't understand how it works. It's not about that. It's about its revenue, but it's also losses over a certain period of time, and you are restricted to how much you can spend based upon profit and sustainability regulations. It's not just about how much money your owner has or how many seats are in your stadium or even how many players you sell. It's a combination of loads of factors. It's a combination of loads of different things within the restrictions that exist. But currently, we see teams under investigations for alleged breaches of those financial restrictions as well. That said, if those teams get away with allegedly breaching those restrictions, it does bring the weight of those down and somewhat makes a bit of a sham of it all. But it is obviously what Arsenal have wanted to do, is to comply within those restrictions to the best of their ability. Plus, release clauses activate a different kind of ways to usual transfers. Release clauses have to be paid most of the time in full, whereas transfers negotiated with teams mean that you can kind of spread those payments across certain periods of time. But then amortization is also different as well. So amortization of fees, if you pay a £50 million figure over 5 years, the amortization would be 10 years on the books on each of the years of that 5-year deal. And it only works up to 5 years now. It used to be longer, and Chelsea took advantage of that with their 8-year contracts. But of course, there were regulations put in place to limit that amortization to just 5 years. Kalum says there was an interesting video on TLDR the other day about how it might have been all Premier League teams tend to make losses each year. And Arsenal have been making losses. That is why Arsenal remain in a sphere where they are conscious about how much they can spend, regardless of how much revenue they make. They have to be conscious because they continue to make losses year on year on year. And we're hoping that that's going to improve. And hopefully this summer's, of course, effectively net zero summer we had is going to let that happen. Trotter says, Man United never let Wayne Rooney leave. I mean, I don't think he ever pushed to leave, to be fair. It wasn't like they're ever in a situation where he ever pushed them to leave. The argument that big teams don't let big players leave, though, Trotter, is just because Wayne Rooney didn't, when we've given you a lot of examples, unfortunately, doesn't really prove the point. The Fab says Saliba will leave next season. It is what it is. We keep going around in circles, so don't blame him. Amara Gooner says Tom, doesn't Kroenke's wife own Walmart? So could she sponsor us? I think there are things in place that are supposed to stop that type of thing. RM says if Leon have got demoted for whatever reason, for whatever they did, surely Man City are going to be finished if they're found guilty. I don't know really the similarities between what has happened to the two clubs. To give you an outside, if you don't know this story, and I'm reading from the Get French Football News website, or Get Football News in France website, Lyon have been handed a severe sanction by the DNCG, the Direction Nationale du Contrôle de Gestion. The French football financial watchdog has decided to hit John Textor owner Ligue 1 club with provisional League 2, or rather Ligue 2 relegation, as well as a transfer ban and the supervision of their wages. Such an outcome was expected considering that the Liga clubs debt reportedly rose from 458 million euros to 508 million euros. Textor reportedly said to the DNCG today that Lyon would be able to sell players or Botafogo players, of course, the Brazilian outfit, which is also owned by Eagle Football Group portfolio, as well as 45% share in the Premier League side Crystal Palace to balance the books. Despite the American businessman's confidence that the meeting with the DNCG went well, the financial watchdog evidently did not agree. As it stands, Lyon will be relegated to Ligue 2 if their financial situation does not improve dramatically. Legones might be forced to sell their prized assets, including France 21 international Ryan Cherki and Belgian international winger Malik Fofana, on the cheap during this winter transfer window. So, yes, it's because of these huge debts that they find themselves in right now that they're in. I actually met Textor at the Arsenal. What game was it? It was the Lyon game. It was the Arsenal-Lyon game in the summer, the Emirates Cup. John Textor was there. He came through the mix zone. He spoke to a reporter who was asking a fair few questions about Everton, was asking about Crystal Palace. And at no point would you ever have assumed in the situation where that conversation was going on that there was kind of these issues in the background. I certainly wasn't aware of them. So, but yeah, he looks like, well, it looks Lyon in general look to be in a bit of trouble. So I hope that I hope that sincerely that they recover, because you never want to see a club, really go through those issues, because it's different. Like, it's not like they're not under investigation for kind of alleged financial breaches. They are, the Liga club's debt rising to 508 million euros is the key thing here. And I think it's a bit different when it comes to kind of comparisons to other teams as well. I guess there's probably barriers in place that are designed so that owners aren't meant to put their clubs in this level of debt. Otherwise, there are sanctions, and I suppose that Lyon have reached those sanctions through the ownership or the way in which it's been run. Mr. Thugi says we should try to strike a deal with Lyon and start a multi-club model by saving them. You say that, but 508 million euros worth of debt that Arsenal would then, or the ownership would then take on, you could argue might even hamstring Arsenal to a degree. So it's not as simple as that. Paul says, is the story of Lyon part of the reason why the Kroenkes haven't gone down their own multi-club model route? I guess it's an example where an owner's got multiple clubs on their books and is having to is affecting kind of the debt that Lyon have, is affecting the ability to spend. He's got, a part share in Crystal Palace at the moment as well. Crystal Palace going to be affected by this? So, that's what I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Maximia, says, Tom, were you able to watch the Tyson Fury versus Jake Paul match? Disappointed to watch a legend struggle in this manner. It was anticlimactic. I haven't seen it. I wasn't going to stay up till 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to watch what is just hilarious at this stage. Like, as Mike Tyson is an absolute legend of the sport, who is at an age where fighting even an inexperienced boxer in terms of Jake Paul is just it's just not level, is it? You can have the experience and the technique, but your body gets to a certain stage where it's just not the same anymore, and you're going up against someone in their physical peak who has had a level of boxing experience and training. You are still limited by what you're able to do, and it, I suppose, is a nice kind of comparison to Arsenal, that you are to a degree limited. It doesn't matter how much experience or how much money you might have. If you are limited by the restrictions that exist in your world, it doesn't matter. You can only extend yourself so far. Harry John says, I don't care what anyone says, Arsenal can still make top 6. Harry John's our resident, won't admit who they support fan in the chat box. Malvin says, Arsenal should keep their best players first and sell the likes of Gabriel, Jesus for Isak and Gyökeres, Partey for Zubamendi, Kivior for Walker-Peters. Don't know about that one. Tomiyasu and Zinchenko for Jorginho are also, and Jorginho should also leave. So did you see Lee Judge's show with Mickey? And here was proposing for football. It's hard to explain, but sounded very good. I haven't seen it. No, I will try and find it. Of course, the model, the former football fan turned model, Lee Judge is there. Front Yard says the fight was terrible, Tom. You didn't miss anything. I do recognize the age factor, but Tyson generally didn't look bothered to fight. I respect the man. but the worst fight I've ever seen. That's not surprising, is it, at all? I don't want this to turn into a Tyson Fury fight analysis, really, considering I didn't watch it nor am entirely at all interested in it. Mike says, my dream transfer for next season is to sell Zinchenko, Tini, Vieira, Jesus, Nelson, Trossard, and bring in Isak Hein, as that is in Carl as our number 2. It's not actually a bad idea. I don't think he's having too bad of a season. I haven't caught up on it, but I've not heard anything to suggest it's not going well. Joshua Kimmich on a free, Baleba, Zubamendi, Sheshko, Rafinha, and Sane. I mean, you don't want much, Mike. You don't want much at all. Trevor says, are Real Madrid's running costs down, i.e. wages plus parachute payments for 2 years? Sorry, RM being a response to the Lyon situation. I don't know if parachute payments happen in the same way in France. Obviously, we have them in England. I don't really know if it happens in France. Last couple. Lloyd says, with Edu gone, who is your preferred candidate to take the job? Simon Rolfs has been my number 1. But Roberto Olabe is proving from the research that I've now done into him to be a very exciting and, a very intriguing candidate who it might be a really good fit for Arsenal, having worked with Arteta in the past, having worked for a number of years in improving a club like Real Sociedad, buying well, selling well, winning trophies. I think that's important. So, yeah, I like this Roberto Olabe link. I think it makes a lot of sense for Arsenal based upon what I've read and now what I've written, which you can read, of course, an article that is down in the link in the description. I recommend you go and read it after we finish today's show, which is going to happen right now. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. Have a fantastic Saturday. I've got a busy one, hence why I'm already dressed to leave the house, because I'm going to be leaving the house immediately after the show's finished, and I've uploaded it to the audio platforms. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Do drop a like before you go. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, rounding up any of the Arsenal news. Fingers crossed for a big result, of course, in the North London derby today. We'll be talking about that tomorrow too. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, and as always, up the Arsenal.